She walked in right after my husband's funeral, not to comfort me, but to declare that this house had always belonged to her. I never thought a legal battle would begin with a cold cup of tea and a carefully hidden will. My name is Claire Bennett, and 3 months ago, I thought I knew what grief looked like. I thought it was the hollow ache that settled in my chest when I kissed Ethan goodbye that Tuesday morning, not knowing it would be the last time I'd see his crooked smile or hear him humming off-key in the shower. I thought grief was the way our 14-year-old daughter Lily cried silently into her pillow, trying to muffle the sound so I wouldn't hear and worry more than I already did. But grief, I learned, has many faces. Sometimes it wears the mask of a concerned mother-in-law bearing casseroles and condolences. Sometimes it masquerades as family loyalty and tradition. And sometimes, grief is just an excuse people use to take what was never theirs to begin with. The funeral was held on a gray October morning in Maple Glen, the kind of small town where everyone knows everyone's business and pretends they don't. The maple trees that gave our town its name were shedding their leaves like tears, carpeting the cemetery grounds in brilliant reds and golds that felt almost mocking in their beauty. How dare the world continue to be beautiful when Ethan was gone? I stood at the graveside in my black dress, Lily's trembling hand in mine, watching as they lowered the casket into the earth. The accident had been so sudden, so senseless. A drunk driver running a red light at the intersection near the hardware store where Ethan had stopped to pick up supplies for the deck he'd promised to build before winter. Just like that, 38 years of life, 16 years of marriage, and 14 years of fatherhood were reduced to a rectangle of polished wood disappearing into the ground. The service was beautiful, if such a thing can be said about a funeral. Pastor Williams spoke about Ethan's gentle spirit and his dedication to his family. Co-workers from the architectural firm where he'd worked for 12 years shared stories about his meticulous attention to detail and his terrible dad jokes. Neighbors remembered his willingness to help with any project, no matter how small. But through it all, I felt strangely disconnected, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. Miriam Bennett, my mother-in-law, had been a constant presence throughout the wake and funeral preparations. She'd arrived from Portland 2 days after the accident, sweeping into our lives with the efficiency of a military general and the emotional manipulation of a skilled politician. At 65, Miriam was still a formidable woman, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and possessed of the kind of quiet authority that made people automatically defer to her judgment. "Oh, Claire, darling," she'd said, enveloping me in a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and barely contained judgment. "You poor thing, how are you holding up? And Lily, my precious granddaughter, come here and let grandmother take care of you." I should have paid more attention to the way she said, "take care of you." I should have noticed how her eyes swept appraisingly over our home, cataloging and calculating. I should have questioned why she immediately began rearranging our kitchen cabinets and reorganizing our daily routine with the presumption of someone who intended to stay much longer than a few days. But I was drowning in grief, barely managing to put one foot in front of the other. And Miriam's take-charge attitude felt like a lifeline. She handled the funeral arrangements with ruthless efficiency, fielding phone calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, coordinating with the church, and ensuring that everything was done properly, as she put it. She cooked elaborate meals that neither Lily nor I had the appetite to eat, cleaned our house from top to bottom, and made herself indispensable in that way that some people do when they're planning to collect on the favor later. The morning after the funeral, I woke up in my empty bed and remembered all over again that Ethan was gone. The house felt different now, not just quieter, but somehow less mine. I could hear Miriam moving around in the kitchen, the sounds of someone who belonged there, who had a right to be there. When I finally dragged myself downstairs in my robe, I found her sitting at our kitchen table with a stack of documents spread before her and a cup of coffee growing cold at her elbow. "Good morning, dear," she said without looking up. "I've taken the liberty of organizing some of Ethan's important papers. There are quite a few things we need to discuss." I poured myself coffee and sat down across from her, noting how she'd said "we" as if I needed her permission to handle my own husband's affairs. The papers were neatly sorted into piles: insurance documents, bank statements, investment accounts, and what appeared to be property deeds. I've been thinking about the practical matters, Miriam continued, her voice taking on that tone of gentle condescension she used when she wanted to make it clear that she knew best. This house, for instance, I'm sure you're very attached to it, but it's far too large for just you and Lily. The maintenance costs alone must be astronomical, and the property taxes in this area are simply outrageous. I set down my coffee cup with more force than necessary. Miriam, I appreciate your concern, but this is our home. Ethan and I chose this house together. We made memories here. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at me then, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, something that might have been pity or might have been something else entirely. Oh, sweetheart, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. You see, this house was never actually yours and Ethan's. It belonged to his great-aunt May. You remember May, don't you? She passed away about 5 years ago and left the property to the family. Ethan was simply managing it for us. The blood drained from my face. That's not possible. We've been making mortgage payments for 7 years. Our names are on the deed. We've put thousands of dollars into renovations. Miriam's smile was patient and patronizing. I'm sure you have the receipts for those improvements, dear. The family will certainly consider reimbursing you for any major renovations, though I hope you understand that normal maintenance and upkeep can't be considered investments in someone else's property. I stared at her, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when I was barely holding myself together. I want to see the paperwork. I want to call our lawyer. Of course, darling. I've already taken the liberty of scheduling an appointment with the family attorney for tomorrow morning. Mr. Hendricks has been handling Bennett family legal matters for decades. He'll be able to explain everything much better than I can. That night, after Miriam had gone to bed in what used to be Ethan's study, I sat in our bedroom, my bedroom, and tried to make sense of what was happening. I knew Ethan's great-aunt May had died 5 years ago. I remembered the funeral, remembered May as a small, sharp-eyed woman who'd always been kind to me but had kept her distance from most of the family. I remembered that she'd left Ethan something in her will, but I'd assumed it was just a small bequest, maybe some family jewelry or a savings account. Could it be possible that we'd been living in May's house all this time? Had Ethan somehow failed to mention that we were essentially caretakers rather than owners? The thought made my stomach churn, not just because of the legal implications, but because it suggested that my husband had kept something fundamental from me. In 16 years of marriage, Ethan had never been secretive about money or property. We'd made financial decisions together, planned for the future together, dreamed about eventually paying off the mortgage together. I got up and went to Ethan's desk, pulling out the filing cabinet where we kept all our important documents. Our mortgage papers were there, showing regular payments made to First National Bank. Our homeowner's insurance policy listed both our names as the insured parties. The property deed, filed with the county, showed us as joint owners. How could all of this be wrong? But doubt is the insidious thing, and grief makes you question everything you thought you knew. By the time I finally fell asleep, I was wondering if maybe I'd misunderstood something fundamental about our life together. Maybe there were legal complexities I'd never bothered to learn about. Maybe Ethan had been protecting me from some family obligation or financial burden that I wasn't equipped to handle. The next morning, I left Lily with a neighbor and accompanied Miriam to the law office of Hendricks, Paulson and Associates. The building was old and imposing, with dark wood paneling and the kind of heavy furniture that was designed to make clients feel small and insignificant. Mr. Hendricks himself was a thin, nervous man in his 70s who kept glancing at Miriam as if seeking her approval before he spoke. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, addressing me with the tone one might use for a confused child. "I'm sorry for your loss. Ethan was a good man, and I'm sure this is all very overwhelming for you." "Thank you," I replied, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "I understand there are some questions about the house." Hendricks shuffled through his papers, his movements seeming deliberately slow. "Well, yes, there are some complications. You see, when Miss May Bennett passed away, she left her entire estate to the Bennett Family Trust. The house at 42 Maple Street was part of that bequest. According to the terms of the trust, family members could live in the property as long as they maintained it properly and paid the associated costs, but the actual ownership remained with the trust. I felt like I was falling through space. But we have a mortgage. We've been making payments for 7 years. Yes, well, that's where things get a bit complicated. Hendricks glanced at Miriam, who nodded encouragingly. It appears that Ethan took out a mortgage against the property without proper authorization from the trust. Legally speaking, he didn't have the right to encumber the property in that way. What does that mean? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. It means that the mortgage is invalid, Miriam interjected smoothly. The bank will have to absorb the loss, and you'll be relieved of that financial burden. You should be grateful. Really. But it also means that you have no legal claim to the property. I looked back at Hendricks. Is that correct? He nodded reluctantly. I'm afraid so. The trust documents are very clear about this. Miss May was quite specific about maintaining family control over the property. And who controls the trust? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. As the eldest surviving Bennett family member, Mrs. Miriam Bennett serves as the primary trustee. Hendricks replied, She has the authority to make decisions about the property, including who may reside there and under what conditions. The room felt like it was spinning. In the space of 24 hours, I'd gone from being a grieving widow trying to rebuild her life to being essentially homeless, dependent on the charity of a woman who'd never particularly liked me. I thought about Lily, about how she'd already lost her father and now faced losing her home as well. I thought about the garden Ethan and I had planted together, the swing set he'd built for Lily when she was small, the kitchen where we'd cooked thousands of meals and shared thousands of conversations. What are my options? I managed to ask. Miriam leaned forward, her expression sympathetic but firm. Well, naturally, you and Lily are welcome to stay in the house for as long as you need to get back on your feet. The trust can certainly accommodate that, but there would need to be some formal arrangements made. Perhaps a rental agreement. Or you could serve as a caretaker in exchange for housing. We'd need to discuss the terms, of course. I felt trapped, cornered, manipulated. But I also felt desperate. Where else would Lily and I go? How could I uproot her from the only home she'd ever known when she was still reeling from her father's death? I need time to think about this. Of course, dear. Take all the time you need. But I do hope you understand that there are certain legal requirements we'll need to address sooner rather than later. The trust has obligations to the other beneficiaries, and we can't simply ignore the proper procedures indefinitely. As we left the lawyer's office, I felt like I was walking through a nightmare. Everything I'd believed about my life, about my security, about my future, had been stripped away in a single morning. Miriam chatted pleasantly about lunch plans and shopping for groceries, as if she hadn't just pulled the rug out from under my entire existence. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, I sat in the kitchen with a glass of wine and tried to process what had happened. The house felt different now, not like home, but like a temporary shelter that could be taken away at any moment. I kept looking around at the familiar objects, the photographs on the walls, the small improvements we'd made over the years, and wondering how long I'd be allowed to keep them. I was startled by a soft knock on the back door. When I opened it, I found Mrs. Patterson, our elderly neighbor, standing on the porch with a concerned expression. Claire, honey, I hope you don't mind me coming by so late. I saw your light on and thought maybe you could use some company. I invited her in, grateful for any distraction from my spiraling thoughts. Dorothy Patterson was 83 years old and had lived next door for 40 years. She'd known May Bennett personally and had watched our family grow up in this house. I heard about what happened at the lawyer's office today, she said gently. News travels fast in a small town, and I wanted to make sure you're okay. I almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. I'm not sure I know what okay means anymore. Dorothy. Apparently, I've been living in someone else's house for the past 7 years without knowing it. Dorothy frowned. That doesn't sound right to me, dear. I remember when May passed away, and I remember the conversations we had about the house. May always spoke about leaving it to the right person, not to the family trust. Something in her tone made me pay attention. What do you mean? Well, May never liked that side of the family much. She thought they were greedy and manipulative. She always said that Ethan was different, that he'd found himself a good wife who understood what family really meant. She used to talk about how much she enjoyed watching you work in the garden, how you'd created a real home here. I felt a flicker of hope. Did she ever say anything specific about the will? Dorothy was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. About a month before she died, May asked me to witness her signature on some legal documents. She said she was making sure her affairs were in order and that the house would go to someone who would appreciate it. She specifically mentioned you. Claire? She said you were the daughter she never had. My heart began to race. Do you remember what kind of documents they were? I'm not sure, honey. But I know she went to a different lawyer than the one the family usually used. She said she wanted someone who would follow her wishes exactly, not someone who could be influenced by family pressure. After Dorothy left, I spent the rest of the night going through every paper in Ethan's desk, looking for any mention of May's will or the house. I found insurance policies, bank statements, investment accounts, but nothing that clarified the legal status of our property. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, I went to bed with more questions than answers. The next morning, I woke up to find Miriam already dressed and sitting at the kitchen table with her phone and a legal pad covered in notes. She looked up as I entered, her expression businesslike. Good morning, Claire. I've been thinking about our situation, and I believe I have a solution that will work for everyone. I poured myself coffee and sat down warily. What kind of solution? Well, I've been in touch with a financial advisor who specializes in estate planning. He's reviewed the trust documents and believes we can structure an arrangement that will allow you to remain in the house while ensuring that the trust's obligations are met. She slid a folder across the table. This is a residential management agreement. Essentially, you would serve as the property manager for the house, handling maintenance, utilities, and basic upkeep. In exchange, you and Lily would have the right to live here rent-free for as long as you fulfill your obligations. I opened the folder and began reading. The document was filled with legal jargon, but certain phrases jumped out at me. Subject to termination at trustee's discretion. Monthly inspections. No modifications without written approval. Termination upon remarriage or cohabitation. This gives you complete control over our lives, I said, looking up at her. You could throw us out at any time for any reason. Miriam's expression was patient but firm. Claire, I understand this is difficult, but you need to be realistic about your situation. You're a single mother with no significant income and no legal claim to this property. This arrangement provides you with housing security while protecting the trust's interests. It's more than generous, considering the circumstances. And what if I refuse to sign this? Then I'm afraid you'll need to make other arrangements. The trust can't allow unauthorized occupancy indefinitely. There are legal liabilities to consider. I felt cornered again, trapped between impossible choices. Sign the agreement and become essentially a servant in my own home, or refuse and face homelessness with a grieving teenager. Neither option seemed like something I could live with. I need to think about this, I said finally. Of course. But I do need an answer by tomorrow evening. I have obligations to the other trust beneficiaries, and this situation needs to be resolved quickly. After Miriam left to run errands, I found myself alone in the house that might not be mine, surrounded by the life I'd thought I understood. I walked through the rooms, touching familiar objects, remembering the conversations and laughter and quiet moments that had filled this space. In the living room, I paused in front of the mantelpiece where we kept family photographs. One picture caught my attention, a snapshot from last Christmas showing Ethan, Lily, and me decorating the tree, with May sitting in the corner armchair, watching us with a small smile. I remembered that day clearly because it had been one of the last times May had visited. She'd been frail but alert, and she'd spent most of the evening talking with me about the garden and the improvements we'd made to the house. "You've made this place into a real home," she'd said. "Not just a house, but a home. That's a rare gift." I remembered how she'd pulled me aside later that evening, her thin hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "Claire, I want you to know that I see what you've done here. You've created something beautiful, something lasting. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you don't belong here." At the time, I'd thought she was just being kind, making conversation. Now I wondered if she'd been trying to tell me something more important. I spent the rest of the day researching property law online, trying to understand the complexities of trusts and estates. What I learned was both confusing and alarming. While family trusts were common, the specific terms of May's trust as described by Hendricks seemed unusual. Most trust documents I found online had provisions for beneficiaries to eventually inherit property outright, not to be held in perpetual limbo as caretakers. I also discovered that if May had wanted to leave the house to me personally, she would have had the legal right to do so, regardless of family expectations. The more I read, the more convinced I became that something wasn't right about the story I'd been told. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of signing Miriam's agreement, I was going to find out the truth about May's will. If Dorothy was right about May using a different lawyer, then there might be documents that contradicted everything Hendricks had told me. I started by calling the county clerk's office to request copies of any wills filed under May Bennett's name. The clerk was helpful but explained that it would take several days to search the records and provide copies. I also made a list of local attorneys who specialized in estate law, planning to call them in the morning to ask if any of them had worked with May. When Miriam returned home that evening, she seemed surprised to find me in the kitchen cooking dinner for Lily and myself. "You seem to be in better spirits," she observed, settling into a chair at the table. "Have you had a chance to review the agreement?" "I have," I replied, not looking up from the stove. "I'm not going to sign it." There was a moment of silence. Then I heard her sharp intake of breath. "Claire, I don't think you understand the seriousness of your situation. This is not a negotiation. This is the only option available to you." I turned to face her, feeling calmer than I had in days. "No, Miriam, I don't think you understand. This is my home. My husband and I bought this house, renovated it, raised our daughter here. If May left it to some family trust, I want to see the actual will, not just take your word for it." Her face flushed with anger. "How dare you question my integrity? I've been trying to help you, to provide for you and Lily when you have nothing. And this is how you repay my generosity?" "I'm not questioning your integrity," I said calmly. "I'm questioning the legal advice we received. I want to see May's actual will, filed with the county. I want to understand exactly what she intended." "Fine," Miriam snapped. "But when you discover that everything I've told you is true, don't expect me to be as accommodating as I've been. There are other ways to handle this situation, ways that might not be as pleasant for you." The threat hung in the air between us, but I no longer felt intimidated. For the first time since Ethan's death, I felt like I had some control over my own life. I was going to fight for what was mine, not just for myself, but for Lily's future. The next morning, I began making phone calls. The third attorney I contacted, a woman named Evelyn Cross, paused when I mentioned May Bennett's name. "I remember Miss Bennett," she said. "She consulted with our firm about estate planning shortly before her death. May I ask why you're inquiring about her will?" I explained my situation, and Evelyn listened without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Bennett, I think you should come in to see me as soon as possible, and please bring any documents you have regarding the property, including your mortgage papers and the deed." An hour later, I was sitting in Evelyn's office, a modern space that felt completely different from Hendricks's intimidating old-fashioned chambers. Evelyn was a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "I'm going to be direct with you, Mrs. Bennett," she said after reviewing my documents. The story you've been told about May's will doesn't match the information in our files. Miss Bennet did consult with us about creating a trust, but she ultimately decided against it. She felt that trusts were too easily manipulated by family members who might not share her values. My heart began to race. What did she decide to do instead? She created a simple will leaving her entire estate, including the house, to specific individuals rather than to the family as a whole. The will was filed with the county clerk's office, and copies were sent to all relevant parties. Do you know who she left the house to? Evelyn smiled. According to our records, she left the house at 42 Maple Street to you, Mrs. Bennet. The will specifically states that she was leaving it to Claire Bennet, wife of my great-nephew Ethan, who has made this house into a true home and who I trust to preserve its heart for future generations. I felt like I might faint. That's impossible. Why wouldn't I have been notified? Why wouldn't Ethan have told me? That's what we need to find out, Evelyn said grimly. Because if what you've told me is accurate, someone has been deliberately concealing the true contents of May's will. And that, Mrs. Bennet, is a very serious crime. We spent the next hour going through the timeline of events surrounding May's death and the subsequent handling of her estate. Evelyn explained that when someone dies, their will must be filed with the county clerk's office within a specific time frame. The executor of the estate is responsible for notifying all beneficiaries and handling the distribution of assets according to the will's instructions. The question is, Evelyn said, who was named as the executor, and why weren't you notified of your inheritance? She made several phone calls while I waited, tracking down the official records of May's estate. Finally, she hung up and turned to me with a grim expression. I have good news and bad news. The good news is that you are indeed the legitimate owner of the house. May's will was properly filed, and you were named as the sole beneficiary of the property. The bad news is that someone has been intercepting the legal notices and documents that should have been sent to you. Who? According to the county records, all correspondence regarding May's estate was sent to Ethan's address but marked for the attention of Miriam Bennet, who identified herself as the family's representative for estate matters. I felt a cold fury building in my chest. She's been stealing my inheritance for 5 years? It appears so. And what's more, the mortgage you've been paying was actually legitimate. May had a small mortgage on the property when she died, and Ethan properly assumed responsibility for it as part of the inheritance process. The house is yours, free and clear, and has been since the day May died. The room seemed to spin around me. For 5 years, I'd been paying a mortgage on a house I already owned. For 5 years, Miriam had known that I was the rightful owner and had said nothing. And now, in my darkest hour, she was trying to manipulate me into signing away my rights to my own property. What can we do about this? I asked. First, we're going to file a complaint with the State Bar Association about Mr. Hendricks's conduct. An attorney has an ethical obligation to represent their client's interests, not to participate in fraud. Second, we're going to demand that Miriam Bennet vacate your property immediately and provide an accounting of any rents or profits she may have collected from the estate over the past 5 years. And if she refuses, then we'll file a civil lawsuit for fraud, conversion, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. What she's done to you is not just morally reprehensible, it's criminal. I left Evelyn's office feeling like I was walking on air. The house was mine. It had always been mine. May had seen something in me, had trusted me with her most precious possession, and I'd never even known about her gift. But more than that, I finally understood that I wasn't helpless, wasn't dependent on anyone's charity, wasn't trapped by circumstances beyond my control. When I arrived home, I found Miriam in the living room, packing her belongings into cardboard boxes. She looked up as I entered, her expression defiant. I see you've been busy this morning, she said coldly. I got a very interesting phone call from someone claiming to be your attorney. Evelyn Cross is my attorney, I replied calmly. And she's helped me understand some very interesting things about May's will. I suppose you think you've been very clever, but this changes nothing. That will can be contested. May wasn't in her right mind when she wrote it. No court will uphold a document that disinherits an entire family in favor of an outsider. I'm not an outsider, I said firmly. I'm May's chosen heir. And you're trespassing on my property. Miriam's face twisted with rage. Your property? You ungrateful little parasite. You've been living off Bennett family generosity for 16 years. Ethan married beneath himself when he chose you, and everyone knew it. You were never good enough for him, and you're certainly not good enough to inherit family property. The words were designed to hurt, to make me doubt myself, to reduce me to the insecure young woman I'd been when I first married Ethan. But I'd been through too much, learned too much, grown too much to be wounded by her venom. You need to leave my house, I said quietly. Now. This isn't over, she hissed, shoving the last of her belongings into a box. I'll fight this in court. I'll prove that you manipulated a sick old woman into changing her will. I'll show everyone what you really are. Good luck with that, I replied. But you'll be doing it from somewhere else, because you're no longer welcome here. After Miriam left, I sat in my kitchen, and called Lily at school. I told her that her grandmother had gone back to Portland and that we needed to talk when she got home. I didn't want to explain the entire situation over the phone, but I wanted her to know that our home was safe, that we weren't going anywhere. That evening, I sat with Lily in the living room and explained everything that had happened. She listened with the seriousness of someone much older than 14, asking thoughtful questions about the legal implications and what it meant for our future. I'm glad she's gone, Lily said finally. She was nice to me, but she always made me feel like I was doing something wrong, and she made you sad. She made me doubt myself, I admitted, but I'm not going to let anyone do that again. Over the next few weeks, the legal process moved forward with surprising speed. Evelyn filed all the necessary paperwork to establish my clear title to the property and to demand restitution for the years of concealed ownership. Mr. Hendricks was investigated by the State Bar Association and ultimately suspended from practice for ethical violations. But the real revelation came when we discovered that Miriam had been collecting rental income from a small cottage behind the main house, a cottage that May had rented to a local teacher for several years before her death. Miriam had continued collecting rent checks made out to the Bennett estate and had deposited them in a private account. Over 5 years, she'd stolen nearly $60,000 in rental income that rightfully belonged to me. When confronted with this evidence, Miriam's attorney advised her to settle out of court rather than face criminal charges for fraud and theft. She agreed to repay the stolen rental income and to sign a legal document acknowledging my ownership of the property and renouncing any future claims to it. The settlement conference was held in a sterile conference room at the county courthouse. Miriam arrived with her attorney, a nervous young man who kept glancing at his client as if he wasn't sure she was stable enough to be making legal decisions. She'd aged noticeably in the weeks since she'd left my house, her silver hair now dull and unkempt, her eyes red-rimmed and hostile. Mrs. Bennett, Evelyn said formally, are you prepared to acknowledge that Claire Bennett is the rightful owner of the property at 42 Maple Street and that you have no legal claim to it? Miriam's attorney nudged her, and she nodded reluctantly. Yes. And do you acknowledge that you unlawfully withheld information about Mrs. Bennett's inheritance and collected rental income that rightfully belonged to her? Another reluctant nod. Please state your acknowledgement clearly for the record. I acknowledge that Claire Bennett inherited the house from May Bennett and that I made mistakes in handling the estate. It wasn't a real apology, but it was enough. She signed the settlement agreement, arranged for the repayment of the stolen funds, and left the courthouse without looking at me. I never saw her again. The months that followed were a time of healing and rebuilding. I renovated the small cottage behind the house and continued renting it out, providing a steady income that supplemented my part-time work at the local library. Lily and I planted a new garden where May's old roses had once bloomed, choosing flowers that would attract butterflies and hummingbirds. I found May's personal papers in the attic, including letters she'd written but never sent. In one of them, addressed to me and dated just weeks before her death, she'd written, "My dear Claire, I hope you never have to read this letter. but I wanted you to know how much your presence in this house has meant to me. You've brought life and love and laughter to these old walls, and you've raised a beautiful daughter who carries the best of both her parents. I'm leaving you this house not just because I trust you to care for it, but because I know you understand that a home is more than just a building. It's a place where love lives, where memories are made, where future generations will learn what family really means. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't deserve this gift. You've earned it through your kindness, your strength, and your ability to see the best in people even when they can't see it in themselves. I kept that letter in my desk drawer and read it whenever I needed to remember that I was exactly where I belonged. One evening in late spring, almost a year after Ethan's death, I was working in the garden when Lily came outside to join me. She was taller now, more confident, beginning to look like the young woman she would become rather than the grieving child she'd been. "Mom," she said, settling down beside me in the dirt. "Do you think Dad knew about the house, about what Great Aunt May wanted?" I considered the question carefully. I think he knew May loved us, and I think he knew she wanted us to be happy. But I don't think he knew about the will. Your father was many things, but he wasn't secretive. If he'd known, he would have told me. Do you think he would have stood up to grandmother if he'd been here? I think your father would have supported whatever made us happy and secure. But you know what? I'm glad I got to handle this myself. I'm glad I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. Lily smiled. You're pretty tough, Mom. I'm getting there. As the sun set over our garden, I felt a peace that I hadn't experienced in years. The house around us was filled with the sounds of ordinary life, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old clock in the hallway, the distant sound of children playing in the street. These were the sounds of home, of security, of a life built on solid ground. I thought about May, about how she'd seen something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. She'd given me more than just a house. She'd given me the chance to discover my own strength, my own worth, my own ability to fight for what mattered. The cottage rental income had stabilized our finances enough that I was able to reduce my hours at the library and focus more on Lily as she navigated her freshman year of high school. She was thriving now, her grades improving, her confidence returning. She'd joined the school's environmental club and had convinced them to start a community garden project. Watching her present her ideas to the town council with such passion and clarity, I saw glimpses of the remarkable woman she was becoming. Dorothy Patterson remained a frequent visitor, often stopping by with fresh cookies or gardening advice. One afternoon in early June, as we sat on the back porch watching Lily teach the neighbors' children how to plant tomato seedlings, Dorothy shared a memory that brought everything full circle. "You know," she said, rocking gently in the old wicker chair that had belonged to May. "I remember the day May first met you. It was at Ethan's graduation from college. She came back here afterward and told me she'd met a young woman with an old soul who understood the difference between a house and a home." She said that. She did. And she was right, wasn't she? Look what you've built here, not just the garden or the renovations, but the life, the peace. May would be so proud. That evening, after Dorothy had gone home and Lily was upstairs doing homework, I found myself alone in the living room where so much of our family's story had unfolded. The walls were lined with photographs now, not just the formal portraits that had been there before, but candid shots of birthday parties and holiday mornings, school plays and family dinners, quiet moments and celebrations. I picked up a frame from the mantelpiece, one that held a picture taken just last month at Lily's school science fair. She was standing next to her project on sustainable agriculture, beaming with pride, while I stood beside her with my arm around her shoulders. We both looked happy, confident, settled in a way that we hadn't been for a long time. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone. And for a moment, I felt a flicker of the old anxiety that had plagued me during those uncertain months. But when I opened the door, I found a young woman about my age standing on the porch, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm sorry to bother you so late. My name is Jennifer Walsh. I think my grandmother might have known yours." I invited her in, curious about this unexpected visitor. Jennifer explained that she'd grown up hearing stories about her grandmother's friendship with May Bennett, how they'd maintained a correspondence for decades despite living in different states. When her grandmother passed away recently, Jennifer had found a box of letters that included several from May, along with my address and a note suggesting that she should introduce herself if she was ever in the area. Grandmother always said that May had the best judge of character she'd ever known, Jennifer said, settling into the chair I offered her. She said May had chosen her heir very carefully, someone who would understand what the house really meant. We talked for nearly 2 hours, sharing stories about May and our grandmothers, about family and loss, and the unexpected ways that love continues to reach across time. When Jennifer finally prepared to leave, she handed me an envelope that had been tucked inside the bouquet. "Grandmother asked me to give this to you if I ever had the chance," she said. "She said May had intended for you to have it, but circumstances made it impossible to deliver before now." After Jennifer left, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of May's distinctive handwriting, dated just days before her death. "Dearest Claire, if you are reading this, then you have already discovered what I hope will be a happy surprise. I have left you my house not as a burden or an obligation, but as a gift between friends. You have given me the joy of watching a family bloom within these walls, of seeing love and laughter return to rooms that had been quiet for too long. I know that others in my family may not understand this choice, may even try to contest it. Don't let them discourage you. You belong in this house not because of any legal document, but because you have made it yours through care and commitment and love. Trust in your own strength, dear one. You are far more resilient than you know. The house comes with only one request, that you continue to fill it with the kind of love that makes a place feel like home. I believe you will do this naturally, as you have done from the moment you first walked through these doors. With love and gratitude for the happiness you have brought to an old woman's final years. May." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness, but of gratitude for the incredible gift May had given me. Not just the house, but the confidence to claim what was rightfully mine. The strength to stand up to those who would diminish me. And the knowledge that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined. The next morning was Saturday, and Lily and I spent it working in the garden, preparing the soil for a new section of herbs that we planned to donate to the school's culinary program. As we worked, I found myself telling her about Jennifer's visit and May's final letter. "It's like she knew exactly what would happen," Lily mused, carefully spacing basil seedlings in their new bed. "Like she knew grandmother would try to take the house and that you'd have to fight for it." "I think May understood people very well," I replied. "She saw strength in me that I didn't know I had." "Or maybe," Lily said thoughtfully, "she just saw what was already there and trusted you to find it when you needed it." Out of the mouths of Babes, my daughter, wise beyond her years, had captured something essential about the whole experience. May hadn't given me strength. She'd given me the opportunity to discover the strength I already possessed. As summer progressed, our life settled into a new rhythm. I increased my hours at the library and began working on a project to digitize the town's historical records, including many documents related to the early Bennett family history. It was satisfying work that connected me to the community in a way I'd never experienced before. Lily started her sophomore year with confidence and enthusiasm. Having been elected to the student council and accepted into the advanced placement program, she still missed her father terribly. We both did. But she was building a life that honored his memory while looking forward to her own future. One evening in early October, almost exactly a year after that first devastating conversation with Miriam, I received a phone call that brought an unexpected sense of closure to the entire ordeal. "Mrs. Bennett, this is Dr. Rebecca Morrison from Portland General Hospital. I'm calling about Miriam Bennett. I understand you're listed as her emergency contact." My blood ran cold. Despite everything that had happened between us, the thought of Miriam in crisis stirred complicated emotions. "Is she all right?" "She's stable, but she's been admitted for severe depression and anxiety. She was found in her apartment by a neighbor after apparently not leaving her home for several weeks. She's asked specifically to speak with you. I told Dr. Morrison I would think about it and call back. The truth was, I wasn't sure what I felt about Miriam's situation. Part of me felt vindicated. Her manipulation and cruelty had finally caught up with her. But another part felt genuinely sorry for a woman who had apparently destroyed herself through her own bitterness and need for control. After discussing it with Lily, who surprised me with her mature perspective on forgiveness and consequences, I decided to call the hospital and arrange for a brief phone conversation. Claire! Miriam's voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it, stripped of its usual authority and condescension. Hello, Miriam. I heard you've been having a difficult time. I wanted to apologize, not because my lawyer told me to, not because I'm trying to get something from you. I wanted to say I'm sorry because I know what I did was wrong. I waited, not sure what to say. I was angry, she continued. Angry that May chose you instead of family. Angry that Ethan loved you more than he respected me. Angry that you seemed to have everything I thought should belong to us. And I convinced myself that taking what I thought was rightfully ours was justified. And now? Now I understand that I destroyed everything I was trying to protect. I lost my son's respect before he died. I lost any relationship I might have had with my granddaughter. And I lost any chance of being part of the family I claimed to be defending. I made myself into exactly the kind of person May was trying to protect you from. The conversation lasted only a few more minutes. Miriam didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't request anything from me. She simply wanted to acknowledge the truth of what she'd done and to tell me that she was glad. In the end, that May's wishes had been honored. I never spoke to her again. But I heard through mutual acquaintances that she eventually recovered enough to move to a senior living facility in Arizona, where she had a distant cousin. I hoped she found some peace there, though I never felt compelled to reach out to her again. The second anniversary of Ethan's death passed more peacefully than I had expected. Lily and I visited his grave in the morning, bringing fresh flowers and sharing memories of his terrible jokes and his patient way of explaining things. In the afternoon, we hosted a small gathering at the house for the friends and neighbors who had become our chosen family. As I watched people laughing and talking in our living room, as I saw Lily confidently serving appetizers and engaging in conversation with adults, as I felt the deep satisfaction of being in my own space surrounded by people who cared about us, I realized that May's gift had been even greater than I'd initially understood. She hadn't just given me a house, she'd given me the foundation I needed to build a life that was entirely my own, based on my own choices and values, rather than on other people's expectations or approval. She'd given me the security to raise my daughter with confidence, to pursue work that fulfilled me, to open my home and heart to new friendships and possibilities. The cottage behind the house had become a gathering place for Lily's environmental club, where they planned their community projects and learned about sustainable living. The rental income it provided had grown into a small scholarship fund that we awarded each year to a local student pursuing environmental science. It felt like a perfect way to honor both May's generosity and in our family's values. One crisp November evening, as I was cleaning up after a particularly successful club meeting, I found a note that one of the students had apparently dropped. It was written in Lily's handwriting, but it was addressed to her father. Dear Dad, I know you can't answer, but I wanted to tell you about how things have turned out. Mom and I are doing really well. We're still in the house you loved so much, and now we know for sure that it's really ours. Mom has become so strong. Dad, I don't think you ever got to see this side of her because she never needed to be this strong when you were here to take care of us. But she's amazing. She fought for us when someone tried to take our home, and she won. She's building this whole life for us that's beautiful and stable and full of people who care about us. I think Great Aunt May knew exactly what she was doing when she left the house to Mom. I think she knew Mom would become the person she needed to be if she just had the chance. I miss you every day. But I'm not worried about us anymore. We're going to be okay. Actually, we're going to be more than okay. We're going to be happy. Love, Lily. I stood in the kitchen, holding my daughter's letter to her dead father, and felt a profound sense of completion. The scared, dependent woman who had sat in Hendrix's office 2 years ago, ready to sign away her rights to her own home, was gone. In her place was someone I was still getting to know. Someone capable of fighting for what mattered. Someone who could build a life based on her own values. Someone who understood that strength isn't about never falling down, but about getting back up and moving forward. The house around me felt different now, too. No longer was it just the place where Ethan and I had been happy, or the place where May had spent her final years. It was the place where Lily was growing into the woman she would become, where I was discovering who I really was, where our future was taking root. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I paused to look at the photographs that lined the stairway wall. Some showed our family as it had been: Ethan, Lily, and me in happier, simpler times. Others captured our new life: Lily at various school events, friends gathered in our living room, quiet moments in the garden, celebrations and ordinary days alike. In the final frame, there was a picture I'd found among May's belongings and had recently decided to display. It showed May as a young woman, standing in front of this same house with a group of friends, all of them laughing at something outside the camera's range. On the back, in May's distinctive handwriting, were the words, "Home is where your story continues." My story was continuing here, in this house that May had entrusted to me, with the daughter who was the best of both her father and myself, surrounded by the community we'd built through our own choices and efforts. It wasn't the story I'd planned when I was young, and it certainly wasn't the story I'd expected when I sat in that lawyer's office feeling powerless and afraid, but it was my story, and it was good. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, where a book waited on the nightstand and where the morning would bring new possibilities. Behind me, the house settled into its nighttime quiet, the peaceful sounds of a home where people belonged, where love lived, where the future was bright with promise. May had been right about so many things, but perhaps most of all about this. I had indeed been far more resilient than I knew. And in finding that resilience, I had found myself.